Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
This happened back in 2011 when I was attending a summer karate camp. My aunt and uncle ran the place, so I got to go for free and even had some say in room arrangements. I've been going there for years and had built up a good reputation as someone who could get along with pretty much anyone. That's where the trouble started. My aunt approached me with a special request, asking if I could take the room next to this new foreign student. She explained that he was having trouble making friends, and she knew I was good with people. She mentioned he was around my age and seemed a bit withdrawn. I agreed without hesitation, which I would later regret deeply. Guess I should have noticed how my aunt seemed slightly hesitant when she asked, like she knew something wasn't quite right about this kid. The guy seemed okay at first, quiet, still learning the language. I tried to be friendly since I was also a foreigner once and remembered how hard it was. I even offered to help him with the local language and showed him around the campgrounds. But after day one, everything changed. It was like he'd been wearing a mask, and once he figured out I was an easy target, he let his true colors show. This guy turned into a complete nightmare. He'd blast music at night when I was trying to sleep, and not just any music, he'd play the same annoying song on repeat for hours. He'd put thorns down my shirt during practice, smear toothpaste on my door handle, and constantly mock me by doing impressions of me. He would put on this annoying voice and make fun of how I was supposedly special just because I knew the camp owners. Other campers would laugh, not realizing how cruel he was being, and he'd feed off their attention like some sort of bully vampire. I tried to ignore it, even told some of the camp counselors, but they just dismissed it as typical teenage behavior. Then he crossed a line that there was no coming back from. See, being close to the camp owners meant I got some special privileges, like being able to bring my Game Boy Advance SP. I had my prized Pokemon Sapphire game with me, the one I've been playing for almost 10 years. My first ever level 100 Pokemon was on that save file, a Steelix I'd named Steely. I'd raised it from an Onix, spent countless hours training it, and even turned down trades from other kids who wanted it. That Pokemon wasn't just a game file, it was a piece of my childhood. One morning I woke up to find my save file completely erased. Somehow he'd snuck into my room and deleted everything. 10 years of memories, gone in an instant. I later found out he'd been bragging to other campers about how he was going to pull the ultimate prank on me, but nobody had warned me. Some of them even congratulated him afterward, not understanding what he'd really done. That's when I decided to get even. I started hanging out with him, acting like his pranks were all in good fun. During our late-night talks, he opened up about everything, including his favorite hobby of vandalizing cars in junkyards. He even showed me videos on his phone of him destroying stuff, proudly explaining how he'd never been caught, because he was too smart for that. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized he wasn't just a bully, he was a genuine vandal who took pleasure in destroying things. That's when I got an idea. I knew my neighbor kept some cars in the fields behind my house. He was a retired mechanic who restored vintage cars as a hobby, and he was very protective of his projects. I casually brought up these cars in conversation, telling him about these supposedly abandoned vehicles near my place. When he asked for more details, I explained they were in the fields behind my house and that nobody ever went there. I even mentioned how my neighbor was away most weekends, knowing full well that was a lie. A few days after camp ended, he sent me a text asking if these were the cars he'd found, a blue sedan and a red pickup. I confirmed they were the ones, adding that I couldn't check myself since I was out with family. What I didn't tell him was that my neighbor had installed security cameras after some local kids had tried to steal parts a few months back. An hour later, he sent me a panicked message. When I asked what was wrong, he explained that the cars weren't actually abandoned and that someone had caught him. It turned out my neighbor had spotted him smashing up the cars, called the police, and held him until they arrived. His parents were so fed up with his behavior that they left him to deal with the consequences alone. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he'd vandalized property. just the first time he'd been caught. He had to get a job to pay for the damages and do community service, which involved helping at a local auto repair shop. Poetic justice, if you ask me. The best part is, I was completely in the clear because I was never there. I didn't damage anything. I just mentioned some cars, never told him to wreck them. All the evidence against him came from his own phone videos showing his history of vandalism. Sometimes I see him around the neighborhood. He just glares at me with pure hatred, probably remembering how his perfect prank backfired. I heard he had to spend every weekend for 6 months working to pay off the damage, and his parents grounded him from all electronics for a year. Every time I see that look of hatred on his face, I think about my deleted Pokemon save file and smile. After all, revenge, like Pokemon, can be super effective. I've been living in the US for several years now, but this story takes place back in my home country about 15 years ago. Things worked differently there. The community was very tight-knit and tribal, and people would always show up to support their friends and family when needed. Some of those customs seem pretty backwards now, but that's just how things were. One night, I was driving around with my friend when he got an intense phone call from his older brother. After hanging up, he seemed really frustrated and asked me to drive to the supermarket near his parents' house. On the way, he called a few more friends to meet us there. Now I know what you're thinking. It sounds like we were some kind of gang looking for trouble. But that wasn't it at all. In our culture, showing up to support your people was just what you did. When we got to the supermarket, we found out what had happened. My friend's mom, this super sweet lady in her 60s who everyone loved, had bought some chicken from the store earlier. When she got home and opened the package, it was completely rotten. She went back to exchange it, being super polite about the whole thing. She even tried to be discreet so other customers wouldn't hear, but the store manager was incredibly rude to her. My friend's brother went inside to confront the manager. He asked if the manager was the one who had told his mother to get out of the store. The manager not only admitted to it but told my friend's brother to get out too, and then shoved him. Big mistake. My friend's brother had always been known for his temper, though he's much calmer these days. He absolutely lost it when the manager put hands on him. Within seconds, punches were flying. Other employees jumped in, so we ran inside to help. It turned into complete chaos. Shelves knocked over, products everywhere, M&Ms scattered all over the floor. After it was over, we knew we were in trouble. In my home country, the law worked differently. If you got into a fight, both parties could press charges regardless of who started it. Whoever filed the complaint first usually had an advantage. So we rushed to the police station. Here's where it gets interesting. While we were at the station filing our complaint, my friend's brother had disappeared for a bit. Turns out, right after the fight, he had been shouting his full name and threatening that he wasn't done with them yet. By pure luck, a passing police patrol heard him. Even better luck, one of the officers was his distant cousin. Small country, remember? And also happened to be a health inspector. After hearing what happened with the rotten chicken, the officer decided to pay special attention to this store. At the station, the store employees showed up to press charges too, but the police clearly favored us. They put the store staff in cells while we sat on couches drinking coffee. Eventually, everyone agreed to drop the charges. The next day, the officer cousin did his inspection. What he found was shocking. The store had been unplugging their freezers at night to save money on electricity. There were tons of spoiled meat and dairy products that could have made people seriously sick. The health ministry got involved, and the fines were so massive that the store never reopened. Later, my friend's brother expressed satisfaction about how things turned out, saying the manager had learned his lesson about treating their mom badly and trying to save money by selling spoiled food. Their mom felt guilty about the whole situation, saying she had only wanted to exchange a chicken. But my friend's brother reassured her that she had actually done everyone a favor, since who knows how many people could have gotten sick from their food. The sweet irony was that if the manager had just been decent and exchanged the chicken like any normal person would, none of this would have happened. His attitude cost him his entire business. After spending 2 decades climbing the telecommunications ladder, from installing basic phone lines to handling complex network infrastructure, I thought I'd seen it all. My journey started right after high school when I chose trade school over college, much to my parents' disappointment. But I had always been good with my hands and loved solving technical puzzles, so it just made sense. After my previous employer downsized during an economic downturn, I found myself searching for work again. That's when I came across this small telecom company that did contract work for one of the biggest wireless carriers in the country. The interview went smoothly. My experience spoke for itself, and they seemed impressed by my track record. They offered me a full-time position, not a contractor role, with benefits and everything. It seemed perfect at the time. The first few months were actually pretty good. I was doing what I did best, solving technical issues and helping customers. My supervisor would often praise my efficiency, especially when handling complex problems that usually required multiple technicians. When a particularly tricky job came up, I told my supervisor I could handle it alone, explaining that I'd seen this issue before. He seemed surprised, mentioning that the last technician had needed backup for this type of job. I assured him it would save both time and manpower. And as usual, I was right. But something changed around the 4th month. That's when the new management started implementing their brilliant policies. During a staff meeting, the regional manager announced the new 2-trip policy. When I questioned the logic of making 2 trips even for simple fixes like pushing a reset button, he shut me down immediately, emphasizing there would be no exceptions to this company policy. It didn't make sense, but we complied. Then came the hour cutting, the excessive monitoring, and the timesheet modifications. Every week brought new frustrations. The mandatory meetings became increasingly ridiculous. During one particularly memorable session, the operations manager confronted me about an 8-minute gas station stop. When I explained it was necessary to fuel up the company truck, he dismissed my explanation and said they would deduct the time. When I pointed out that I couldn't do my job without fuel, he coldly suggested I should have done it before my shift. The final straw was their 2 tickets per day rule. That's when I decided enough was enough. I called a secret meeting with my fellow technicians at my house one weekend. I opened the meeting by suggesting we give management exactly what they wanted: numbers. When one of my colleagues asked for clarification, I explained that we should provide them with precisely what they asked for: GPS data and timestamps down to the minute. Another tech caught on quickly to what I was suggesting, and I confirmed we would follow their rules precisely, every single one. The plan was simple but beautiful. Monday morning came and we executed it perfectly. Every truck's GPS showed us at job sites for exactly 2 hours per assessment. Every return trip was meticulously timed and logged. When the next mandatory meeting came, the regional manager could hardly believe the hours he was seeing. I offered to walk him through our PowerPoint presentation, explaining that we'd documented everything as requested. One of my fellow techs helpfully reminded me about the fuel receipts, and I made sure to point out that while fuel costs had tripled, we had GPS logs proving every minute was spent exactly where we were supposed to be. Their faces turned pale as they realized what we'd done. We'd followed their rules to the letter, and it was costing them a fortune. But the best part came 2 weeks later when representatives from the big wireless carrier showed up for an audit. The aftermath was spectacular. The small company's fraudulent practices were exposed. They'd been double billing the big carrier for unnecessary trips, pocketing the difference, and trying to cut our pay to maximize their profits. Several managers faced criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. As for us technicians, the big wireless carrier offered us direct positions with better pay and normal working conditions. I've been hosting Christmas parties at my place for almost a decade now. It started back when I first moved into my house and wanted to create some holiday traditions of my own. Being single at the time and living away from family, I decided to gather all my friends under one roof for a night of festive celebration. What began as a small gathering of maybe 20 people grew into this huge annual event that everyone looks forward to. About 3 years ago, one of my closest friends from college met my former co-worker at my party. I remember the moment clearly. She was admiring my Christmas tree collection. I have one in every room, each with a different theme. And he came over to compliment the Star Wars themed one in my office. They instantly clicked. I was thrilled when they started dating. Throughout their relationship, they'd often reminisce about how they met at my party. Then 2 years ago, they chose my Christmas party as the place to announce their engagement. She walked in with this gorgeous ring, and everyone celebrated. It was such a special moment, and I felt honored that my party had become such an important part of their love story. Fast forward to this spring, they got married. I kept waiting for the invitation, thinking maybe it got lost in the mail, but nothing ever came. I found out through social media that the wedding had happened. It stung, especially when I saw photos of people I knew were just casual acquaintances of theirs in attendance. After the wedding, I sent them a message congratulating them and mentioning how beautiful their photos looked. The bride thanked me and gushed about how perfect everything had turned out. When I kept things polite, she added that they had to keep the wedding somewhat small, as if explaining why I wasn't invited. I didn't push the issue, but later I learned there were about 200 guests. That's not exactly what I'd call a small wedding. When it came time to send out my Christmas party invitations this year, I simply left them off the list. I figured if I wasn't important enough to make their guest list, why should they be on mine? Today, a mutual friend called me to give me a heads up about the situation. They told me that the newlyweds were upset about not getting an invitation to my party this year. When I expressed mild surprise, the friend explained that the couple was saying my party was really special to them because of their history there, and they thought I was being petty about the wedding thing. I pointed out that their history at my party was exactly why I was surprised they didn't include me in their wedding. The friend tried to defend them by mentioning it was a smaller wedding, but when I told them about the 200 guests I'd seen in photos, they went quiet, clearly not having realized the true size of the event. Later that day, the bride texted me. She was clearly upset, saying she couldn't believe they weren't invited and emphasizing how meaningful my party was to them. I kept my response simple, explaining that I decided to keep it to closer friends this year. She protested, bringing up how they'd met at my party and got engaged there, calling it their tradition. When I pointed out that I thought we were close friends too, close enough for a wedding invitation, she got defensive. She tried to justify their decision by saying they had to make tough choices with their guest list. I turned her words back on her, telling her I understood completely because I'd had to make some tough choices with my guest list too. This made her angry, and she accused me of being spiteful and ridiculous. I stayed calm and explained that I was just being realistic about where our friendship stood, as their wedding had made things pretty clear. The direct messages stopped after that, but I heard that they've been complaining to anyone who listened about how I ruined their Christmas tradition and how they were planning to announce their pregnancy at my party this year. That last bit really got to me. They were planning to use my party for another major life announcement without even considering how they'd treated me. My house isn't some sort of public venue for their relationship milestones. It's my home, and my party is about celebrating the holidays with people I care about. People who care about me too. My partner initially suggested I should just let it go and invite them, but after hearing about their pregnancy announcement plans, even they agreed that the couple had been taking advantage of my hospitality. The party was last weekend and it was wonderful, filled with people who genuinely value our friendship, not just my party's convenient setting for their personal announcements. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.